Hello and welcome to a new episode of Another History of the World. Today we're going to be talking about Kaʻiulani, the Island Rose. Hawaii's been a US state for over 60 years, but how it came to be part of the United States is kind of complicated, and one of the pivotal figures in this history has been mostly forgotten. Princess Kaʻiulani was born Victoria Kaʻiulani Cleghorn on 16th October 1875. She was the only child of Princess Miriam Likelike, the niece of King Kalakaua, and his sister Lilua Kalani, who became queen after his death. The princess became the heir apparent to the throne of the Hawaiian kingdom. The princess had an idyllic childhood. She lived at Anahu, or cool land, in Waikīkī, riding horses, playing croquet, surfing, and playing the ukulele. Her mother welcomed many people to their home, including the author and poet Robert Louis Stevenson, a Scot like the princess's father, Archibald Scott Cleghorn. It was Stevenson who called the princess an island rose, writing a beautiful poem he wrote in her autograph book. After her mother died, the princess was sent to boarding school in England at age 13 to complete her education under the guardianship of a British businessman and Hawaiian sugar investor Theo Davis. Her father later joined her and escorted her to his native Scotland. The princess visited Dreghorn Castle, studied Scots Gaelic, rode a horse across the Highlands, and spent many afternoons painting scenes of the Scottish countryside. While the princess was away, her aunt, Lilua Kalani, was forced from the throne by a group of local American and British businessmen. Backed by the US Marines, the Committee of Safety sought to overthrow the Queen and annex Hawaii to the US. In January 1893, the Queen yielded her power and appealed to the American people to restore Hawaii's constitutional monarchy as the legitimate government. The princess, who had been preparing to lead her people and become queen, was shattered. There were lies being printed in newspapers across the US, calling the Hawaiians barbarians, uncivilized, and unable to rule themselves. There were degrading political cartoons too. One Minnesota newspaper cartoon portrayed the Queen as a black slave attempting to hand over the crown to a pawnbroker for cash, while another magazine cover portrayed Hawaii as a troublemaking Topsy from Uncle Tom's Cabin. The princess addressed the English press, which was then dispatched to the American newspapers. She said, "For all these years I've patiently and in exile striven to fit myself for my return this year to my native country. Have I done anything wrong that this wrong should be done to me and my people? I'm coming to Washington to plead for my throne, my nation, and my flag. Will not the great American people hear me?" The princess simply wanted to do her duty to beloved Hawaii. When the princess arrived in New York, she gave a statement to the American people, saying, 70 years ago, Christian America sent over Christian men and women to give religion and civilization to Hawaii. They gave us the gospel, they made us a nation, and we learned to love and trust America. Today, 3 of the sons of those missionaries are at your capital asking you to undo their father's work. Who sent them? Who gave them authority to break the Constitution, which they swore they would uphold? Public sentiment shifted. The American press began to correct the record, writing of her beauty and her ability to lead, though they also called the princess entirely English, to which she said, "I am all Hawaiian." The US President, Cleveland, went to meet the princess and reassess the situation in Hawaii. Minister James Blount was sent to Honolulu to conduct an investigation of the political system, and he recommended that the Queen be restored to her throne. The provisional government refused to return power. Unwilling to use force, the president appealed to Congress to demand that the government yield their power, but he was unable to stop the tide. His successor, President McKinley, annexed Hawaii in 1898, the same year that the US gained control of Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Like many other Hawaiians, the princess spent the day of annexation in a day of mourning. The Americans celebrated with an annexation ball. Reporters asked the princess if she'd been invited, to which she said, "Why don't you ask me if I'm going to pull down Hawaii's flag for them? You know they wanted to find 12 native girls to raise a new flag. They thought it would be poetic. They did not find them." But even though the independence of Hawaii was lost, the princess and her aunt turned their efforts toward voting rights for the Hawaiian people. When President McKinley sent a delegation to the islands, the princess invited them to a lavish reception, making sure they were seated between very well-educated Hawaiians, so they could no longer pretend that Hawaiians did not deserve to vote as much as anyone else. The princess's death has rather overshadowed her life. In January 1899, she became ill after riding her horse in a storm and never fully recovered, although she'd had chronic health problems that likely contributed to her death on 6 March 1899. Kaʻiulani was just 23 years old. Although the princess never ruled Hawaii on the throne, she fought for her people, and by telling the truth, she changed history.